Hello everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe and one share.
The night I laughed at reality TV. What if the television show you almost ignored could quietly reveal the biggest truth about your marriage, your family, and even the way you learn English? A year ago, I would have laughed at that idea. I believed reality TV was nothing more than loud arguments, dramatic music, and people chasing attention. Then one ordinary Friday night in our home in the United States changed everything. I wasn't expecting to cry, smile, question my own heart, or discover that a simple story on a screen could connect strangers in ways I had never imagined. If you have ever wondered why millions of Americans keep watching reality TV, stay with me, because the answer surprised me more than anyone. My name is Emily, and this is a story from my everyday life in America. It began after a long workday when the house finally became quiet. Dinner was finished. The dishes were clean. My children were sitting on the living room floor with soft blankets. And my husband was already holding the TV remote with a smile that usually meant he had picked another reality show. I rolled my eyes and laughed. Again? I asked. He only smiled and said, "Just give it 10 minutes. I sat down because I was too tired to argue. At first, everything looked exactly as I expected. Bright lights. Nervous contestants. Cameras following every little conversation. I whispered to myself that this was not real life. But then something unexpected happened. One woman stood silently in the kitchen while everyone around her argued. She looked tired. She looked disappointed. She looked like someone trying to stay strong even when nobody noticed. For a second, the room around me disappeared. I recognized that expression because I had seen it in my own mirror. Without realizing it, I stopped checking my phone. My children stopped talking. Even my husband became quiet. Somehow, an ordinary television program had made our entire family listen. That surprised me more than anything else. One reason I enjoy sharing stories like this is that they make English feel natural instead of stressful. When people speak about family, love, mistakes, or hope, the words become easier to remember. You do not need difficult grammar to understand honest emotions. Listening to real conversations again and again helps your brain notice pronunciation, rhythm, and useful expressions without feeling like a classroom. Researchers in language learning have found that meaningful stories improve attention and long-term memory because emotions help our brains remember information more deeply. As the episode continued, I noticed something interesting about American culture. Nobody in my family cared whether every scene was perfectly real. They cared about the emotions. They wanted to discuss the choices people made. They wanted to ask, "What would you do?" Instead of watching strangers, we were actually talking about ourselves. That conversation lasted much longer than the television show. Later that evening, my daughter surprised me with a question I never expected. She looked at me with serious eyes and asked, "Mom, if cameras followed our family for 1 week, would people think we were happy?" I smiled at first, but the answer stayed trapped inside my heart. I suddenly realized I did not know how to answer honestly. That simple question refused to leave my mind. I had started the evening believing reality TV was fake entertainment. Now I was lying awake, wondering why one little question from my daughter felt more real than anything I had heard all week. And the next morning, something happened in our neighborhood that made me see reality television, and my own family, in a completely different way. My neighbor's secret changed everything. The strange part wasn't what I saw the next morning. It was how quickly one ordinary conversation made me question everything I believed about reality TV, family, and the people living just a few steps away from my own front door. Sometimes Americans say, "Don't judge a book by its cover." I had heard that expression many times while practicing English, but I never truly understood it until that Saturday morning. By sunset, I realized I had judged both a television show and a real person in exactly the same unfair way, and that discovery completely changed my heart. The morning air was cool, and the neighborhood was unusually quiet. I carried a cup of coffee onto my front porch while watching children ride bicycles along the sidewalk. Across the street, my neighbor Sarah was loading several large boxes into the back of her SUV. She looked exhausted. I had always thought she had the perfect American life. A beautiful house, a friendly husband, 2 cheerful children. Every holiday, their family decorated the yard before anyone else. From the outside, they looked like the kind of family people would admire on television. I walked over and asked if she needed help. She smiled politely, but I could immediately see she had been crying. We carried the heavy boxes together without speaking much. Finally, she took a deep breath and quietly said, "Everyone thinks we're doing great because they only see the highlights." That sentence stopped me in my tracks. The night before, I had watched people on reality TV showing emotional moments that many viewers believed were exaggerated. Now a real woman standing in front of me had just described her own life using almost the same idea. People only noticed the beautiful moments. They never saw the difficult conversations, the financial pressure, the sleepless nights, or the silent worries hidden behind closed doors. Sarah laughed softly and admitted something unexpected. Believe it or not, our family actually watches reality TV together every Friday. It reminds us that every family struggles somehow. I almost laughed because those words sounded impossible. Was that really why millions of Americans kept watching these programs? Maybe they were not searching for perfect people at all. Maybe they simply wanted proof that nobody was alone. As we finished carrying the last box, Sarah thanked me with a warm smile that looked much more genuine than the confident smile she usually showed outside. Walking back home, I kept repeating one simple English word in my mind, authentic. It means real, honest, and true to yourself. That single word suddenly felt more valuable than memorizing 20 difficult vocabulary words. When language connects to real emotions, remembering it becomes surprisingly easy. Later that afternoon, my husband suggested we watch another episode together. This time I paid attention differently. Instead of asking whether every scene was perfectly real, I listened carefully to the conversations, the pauses, and the emotions behind each sentence. I noticed useful expressions, natural pronunciation, and everyday American phrases that people actually use in family life. Learning English no longer felt like studying. It felt like listening to neighbors share honest stories. Then, halfway through the episode, one contestant revealed a painful family secret that sounded strangely familiar. My husband slowly turned toward me without saying a word. I looked back at him, and we both realized we were thinking about Sarah. At that exact moment, my phone suddenly vibrated. It was a text message from Sarah. "I need to tell someone the truth. Can you come over tonight?" I stared at the screen for several seconds, completely frozen. Because something told me this conversation was about to become far bigger than moving a few boxes. The truth behind the perfect smile. Have you noticed how one honest conversation can stay in your mind longer than 100 dramatic television episodes? That night, I thought I was simply walking across the street to comfort a neighbor. I had no idea I was about to hear a story that would completely change the way I understood American families, reality TV, and even my own marriage. The front door opened before I knocked, and Sarah's first words made my heart race. "Thank you for coming." I didn't know who else to trust. I stepped inside her house, expecting to see the same cheerful home everyone admired. Instead, the living room was quiet. Family photos still covered the walls, smiling faces frozen in happy moments, but the silence between those pictures felt heavy. Sarah invited me to the kitchen, poured 2 cups of tea, and stared out the window for several seconds before speaking. "People think our family is perfect because that's all they ever see," she whispered. "The truth is, we've been pretending for a long time." I listened without interrupting. She explained that she and her husband had spent months trying to protect their children from constant stress. Work schedules were exhausting. Bills kept increasing. Simple conversations often turned into arguments because both of them were emotionally tired. They still loved each other deeply, but they had forgotten how to slow down and really listen. Her words reminded me of something I had watched on reality TV only the night before. A couple had stopped arguing for just 1 minute and finally admitted they were both afraid, not angry. At the time, I wondered if the scene had been exaggerated for television. Sitting across from Sarah, I realized those emotions were painfully real. Then she smiled unexpectedly. "You know what helped us most?" she asked. I guessed it might be counseling or a family vacation. She shook her head. "We started talking after every reality TV episode." I blinked in surprise. She laughed softly at my expression. "The people on TV gave us safe questions. Instead of saying, 'You're wrong,' we'd ask, 'What would you do if you were that couple?' Somehow it became easier to understand each other." That answer stayed with me because it sounded surprisingly practical. Sometimes discussing someone else's story makes it easier to share your own feelings. Psychologists often describe this as emotional distancing. When people reflect on another person's experience first, they become less defensive and more willing to speak honestly about themselves. It was fascinating to realize that a television program could create meaningful conversations instead of ending them. As someone who enjoys improving my English little by little, I also noticed something interesting. Sarah spoke slowly whenever she described emotional moments. She naturally repeated simple expressions like "I understand," "I was scared," "let's talk," and "we'll figure it out." Those short, everyday phrases carried more emotional power than advanced vocabulary ever could. That reminded me that real communication is not about using difficult words. It is about choosing honest ones. Before I left, Sarah handed me a small notebook. Inside, she had written meaningful English phrases that her family liked after watching different shows together. Each page included one expression, one simple definition, and one memory connected to it. It was one of the most creative ways I had ever seen someone practice English while strengthening family relationships at the same time. Just as I stood up to leave, headlights suddenly filled the front window. Sarah looked outside. Her smile disappeared. She quietly whispered, "He's home early and he doesn't know I asked you to come." The sound of a car door closing echoed through the driveway, and for the first time that evening, I realized the most important part of Sarah's story had not even begun. The conversation I never expected. The front door opened, and for one long second, nobody moved. I thought I was about to witness the kind of explosive argument that reality TV loves to turn into a dramatic cliffhanger. Instead, what happened next caught me completely off guard. There were no raised voices. No broken promises. No slammed doors. Just one quiet sentence that revealed why millions of Americans are drawn to real stories instead of perfect ones. In that moment, I realized that the strongest emotions are often spoken in the softest voices. Sarah's husband, Michael, stepped inside carrying a grocery bag and looked surprised to see me sitting at the kitchen table. He smiled politely, but I noticed the tiredness in his eyes immediately. Sarah stood up, walked toward him, and before I could think of anything to say, she gently reached for his hand. "I finally told Emily the truth," she said. Michael closed his eyes for a brief moment. Then he nodded. "I guess it's time we stopped pretending." His answer filled the room with relief instead of tension. I had imagined the worst, but the truth was much more human. They were not hiding a shocking secret. They were hiding exhaustion. They had spent so much energy trying to look like the perfect American family that they had forgotten perfection was never the goal. Michael placed the groceries on the counter and laughed quietly. "Do you know the funniest part?" he asked me. "Every Friday we watch families on reality TV making mistakes, and we tell the kids nobody's perfect. Then we spend the rest of the week pretending that we are." We all laughed together. That laughter felt honest. It reminded me that real connection often begins the moment people stop performing for each other. The conversation slowly became deeper. Michael admitted he had been working longer hours than ever before. Sarah confessed she sometimes felt invisible even inside her own home. Neither of them wanted to hurt the other. They had simply become trapped inside busy schedules, just like countless families across America today. Listening to them, I realized something important. Reality TV is not always about drama. Sometimes it gives people permission to talk about subjects they have avoided for months. A single episode can begin conversations about trust, parenting, communication, forgiveness, or dreams that quietly disappeared beneath everyday responsibilities. One English expression came into my mind while they were talking: "We're on the same team." It is a simple phrase, but Americans use it often in relationships because it reminds couples that solving a problem together is more important than winning an argument. I repeated this sentence silently several times. It was easy to understand, easy to remember, and surprisingly powerful. Research in relationship psychology suggests that couples who approach conflict as shared challenges instead of personal battles often build stronger emotional resilience over time. As I listened to Sarah and Michael, I could almost see that idea unfolding in real life. They were no longer trying to prove who was right. They were trying to understand why both of them were hurting. Before I left, Sarah smiled for the first time that evening without forcing it. "Next Friday," she said, "come watch the show with us." I happily agreed. Walking home under the quiet evening sky, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I thought the story had reached its happy ending. I was wrong. The following Friday, during what should have been another relaxing family TV night, something happened on the screen that caused my husband to suddenly mute the television, look directly at me, and ask one unexpected question that neither of us was ready to answer. The question that silenced our living room. Are we still making time for each other, or are we just sharing the same house? My husband asked that question so quietly that I almost wished I hadn't heard it. The television was still paused. The room was completely silent. Just a few seconds earlier, we had been laughing at a reality TV competition. Then one contestant admitted that she no longer recognized the person she had married, and suddenly my husband reached for the remote. I looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, I realized he wasn't talking about the people on the screen. He was talking about us. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked around our living room. The children were upstairs finishing homework. The dishes were drying in the kitchen. Outside, the neighborhood was peaceful, with porch lights glowing across the street. From the outside, our family probably looked just as happy as Sarah's family had looked a week earlier. That thought made my heart beat faster. "I don't know," I finally whispered. My husband didn't argue. He simply nodded. "I don't know either." Sometimes the most honest conversations begin with 4 simple words. For the next few minutes, we talked about things we had quietly ignored. Busy work schedules. Endless errands. School activities. Grocery shopping. Household routines. None of those things were bad by themselves, but together they had slowly replaced the little moments that once made us feel close. We weren't unhappy. We were distracted. That realization reminded me why so many Americans enjoy reality TV. It is rarely about watching perfect people succeed. It is about recognizing familiar emotions inside ordinary situations. Every family has moments of misunderstanding. Every relationship needs attention. Watching someone else struggle sometimes gives us permission to admit our own challenges without shame. As we talked, I noticed another small lesson for anyone learning English. My husband didn't use difficult vocabulary to express his feelings. He chose short, clear sentences. "I miss our talks. We've both been busy. I want us back." Those simple expressions carried more emotion than complicated grammar ever could. Native speakers often communicate with ordinary words because sincerity matters more than sounding impressive. Repeating natural phrases like these while listening can improve both confidence and pronunciation. Then something completely unexpected happened. Our daughter quietly walked downstairs. Neither of us had heard her. She looked at us for a moment before asking, "Are you two okay?" I smiled and invited her to sit beside us. She hesitated before speaking again. "I like when you watch shows together," she said. Afterward, everyone laughs more. Her words touched me deeply. Children notice things adults often miss. She wasn't talking about television. She was talking about connection. To her, Friday nights were never really about entertainment. They were about seeing her parents slow down, listen, smile, and simply enjoy being together. Psychologists often explain that shared family routines create emotional security for children. Whether it's eating dinner together, taking evening walks, or watching one favorite program every week, these predictable moments strengthen trust and belonging. Sitting there beside my daughter, I understood that our Friday tradition had quietly become much more valuable than I had realized. Before bedtime, my husband suggested we continue our new habit. "No phones during the show next week," he said with a grin. Everyone agreed. I thought we had discovered the perfect solution. But early the next morning, before breakfast was even ready, Sarah knocked on our front door with tears in her eyes, holding an envelope that she said could change everything for her family. The envelope nobody wanted to open. There are moments when a single knock on the front door can completely change the direction of an ordinary weekend. When I opened the door and saw Sarah standing there with trembling hands, I immediately knew this wasn't a friendly morning visit. She wasn't carrying coffee or homemade cookies like she sometimes did. She was holding a plain white envelope so tightly that it had become wrinkled around the edges. Before I could even ask what had happened, she quietly said, "I'm afraid this piece of paper might tell our children that life is about to change." My heart sank before I even knew what was inside. I invited her into the kitchen while the smell of fresh pancakes filled the house. My husband took the children outside to play basketball, giving us a little privacy. Sarah sat across from me without saying a word. She placed the envelope on the table but didn't open it. For almost a full minute, we simply looked at it. Finally, she smiled nervously. "You know what's funny?" she whispered. "If this happened on reality TV, millions of people would be guessing what's inside." I couldn't help smiling. She was right. Stories naturally create curiosity because our brains want answers. Neuroscientists explain that uncertainty activates attention and encourages us to keep following a story until we discover the outcome. Maybe that is one reason Americans enjoy reality TV so much. Every unanswered question becomes an invitation to keep watching. Sarah slowly opened the envelope. Inside was not a divorce paper. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't bad medical news. Instead, it was an official letter informing Michael that his company would be reorganizing several departments. His position wasn't gone yet, but it could disappear within the next few months. She exhaled deeply. "We're scared," she admitted. "Not because we've already lost something, but because we don't know what comes next." I reached across the table and gently held her hand. Life in America often moves quickly. Careers change. Companies restructure. Families adjust. Behind many smiling faces are people quietly adapting to unexpected changes. That morning reminded me that resilience is often built long before anyone else notices the challenge. As we talked, Sarah pointed to one sentence in the letter. "The future remains uncertain." She laughed softly. "That's my new English phrase for today." We both smiled. Sometimes the most useful vocabulary comes from real life instead of textbooks. Words like uncertain, opportunity, support, courage, and together carry emotional meaning that stays with you because they become part of your own story. Learning English through genuine experiences makes every phrase easier to remember and much more meaningful. An hour later, Michael returned home. Instead of panic, he surprised both of us. "We'll make a plan," he said calmly. "No matter what happens, we'll face it together." Those simple words completely changed the atmosphere inside the room. Research on family resilience consistently shows that emotional support and open communication often reduce stress more effectively than trying to predict every possible outcome. Watching Michael comfort his family reminded me once again that real strength is usually quiet. That evening, our family still gathered for Friday reality TV night. But this time, nobody was really watching for the competition. We were watching because every story on the screen reminded us that ordinary people survive extraordinary moments one conversation at a time. Then, just before the episode ended, the host announced a surprise reunion featuring a family separated by years of misunderstanding. Sarah looked at me. Michael slowly lowered the remote. My husband leaned forward without blinking. None of us knew it yet. But the emotional reunion we were about to watch would inspire a decision inside our own families that would change far more than a television evening ever should. The reunion that changed our hearts. I expected to watch another emotional television reunion. I never expected it to quietly rewrite the way I looked at my own family. As the lights dimmed and the audience applauded, the host welcomed two brothers who had not spoken to each other for almost 10 years. Nobody in our living room reached for a phone or even touched the popcorn. Something about their nervous faces felt incredibly real. Before either brother said a single word, I could already feel tears forming in my eyes, and I wasn't the only one. The older brother finally broke the silence. "I thought being right was more important than staying close." Those 11 words echoed through the room. No dramatic music could make them more powerful. The younger brother simply nodded before answering, "I thought you didn't need me anymore." For several long seconds, neither of them spoke again. They walked toward each other and shared an awkward hug that slowly became genuine. The audience clapped, but our living room remained completely silent. My husband quietly reached for my hand. Across the room, Sarah wiped away a tear while Michael looked down at the floor, lost in thought. What moved me wasn't the reunion itself. It was how ordinary the misunderstanding sounded. There had been no villains. No shocking betrayal. Just years of assumptions that quietly grew into distance. That reminded me why reality TV continues to attract millions of viewers across the United States. At its best, it reflects emotional situations that many people recognize in their own lives. The details may change, but loneliness, forgiveness, hope, and love are universal. When the commercial break began, nobody rushed to refill snacks. Instead, my husband surprised everyone. "If I ever stop listening," he said softly, "please tell me before we become strangers living in the same house." His honesty filled the room with unexpected warmth. Sarah smiled through her tears. "That's exactly what Michael and I are learning." We spent the next half hour talking instead of watching television. Every person shared one small thing they appreciated about someone else in the room. The atmosphere changed completely. Laughter replaced awkward silence. Even the children joined the conversation, smiling as they described their favorite family memories. That evening taught me another beautiful English expression, "I'm here for you." Americans use it often because those 4 simple words communicate loyalty, comfort, and emotional support. They are easy to pronounce, easy to remember, and meaningful in almost every relationship. Sometimes learning one heartfelt sentence is far more valuable than memorizing a long vocabulary list. Psychologists often explain that expressing gratitude strengthens relationships by shifting attention away from daily stress and toward positive emotional experiences. Looking around the room, I realized we were experiencing exactly that. Nobody had solved every problem. Sarah's family still faced uncertainty about Michael's job. Life was still busy. Bills still existed. But everyone felt lighter because they knew they weren't carrying those burdens alone. As the evening came to an end, we turned the television off before the credits finished. For the first time in weeks, it didn't matter who had won the competition. We had already found something more valuable. Walking Sarah to the front door, she smiled at me with a confidence I hadn't seen since that first difficult morning. "You know," she said, "maybe Americans don't love reality TV because it's perfect." I nodded. "They love it because imperfect people remind us we're never fighting alone." I thought that beautiful sentence would become the final lesson of the night. Then my phone buzzed with a notification from our neighborhood community group. A local family had just lost everything in a devastating house fire. Without realizing it, our little Friday tradition was about to become something much bigger than watching stories. It was about to help create one. When stories became real life. Have you ever realized that the most unforgettable story is the one that suddenly becomes your own? That notification on my phone looked like hundreds of others I had ignored before. But this time everything felt different. A family just a few blocks from our home had lost nearly everything in a house fire overnight. Within minutes, our neighborhood chat filled with messages asking for blankets, clothes, food, and volunteers. As I looked around the living room, I noticed something remarkable. Nobody reached for the television remote. Without saying a word, every person in the room already knew what we were going to do next. Sarah stood first. "We have extra blankets." Michael nodded. "I can borrow a truck." My husband looked at me with the same quiet smile that had convinced me to watch reality TV weeks earlier. "We're going too, right?" I smiled before he even finished asking. "Of course." Less than an hour later, our cars were filled with boxes, groceries, children's toys, warm jackets, and household supplies. The neighborhood looked completely different from its usual peaceful weekend atmosphere. Families walked from house to house carrying donations. Teenagers helped move furniture. Elderly neighbors prepared hot meals. Complete strangers greeted one another like lifelong friends. Standing there, I suddenly understood something that no television episode had ever fully explained. The real story always begins after the cameras stop rolling. The family affected by the fire welcomed each volunteer with tired smiles. Their youngest daughter hugged a stuffed teddy bear someone had donated only minutes earlier. Her mother quietly thanked every person who entered the driveway, even though she was clearly overwhelmed. I found myself fighting back tears. Not because of the tragedy. Because of the kindness. Researchers studying community psychology often explain that helping others strengthens emotional well-being for both the person receiving support and the person offering it. Acts of generosity activate feelings of belonging, purpose, and hope. Looking around that crowded driveway, I wasn't thinking about scientific studies anymore. I was watching those ideas come alive in front of me. While organizing donated books, I picked up a children's storybook and noticed one simple English sentence printed on the first page. Kindness grows when we share it. I smiled. It wasn't difficult vocabulary. It wasn't advanced grammar. But it carried a message that every English learner could understand immediately. Sometimes the most memorable language lessons come from moments that touch the heart instead of challenging the mind. That short sentence stayed with me long after the boxes had been unpacked. Later that afternoon, our children began playing together with the family's kids as if they had known each other for years. Sarah whispered something that I will never forget. Maybe this is why Americans love stories. I looked at her curiously. She continued, stories remind people they can become part of someone else's happy ending. Her words stayed with me during the drive home. Reality TV had introduced us to emotional conversations. Those conversations had strengthened our friendships. And now those friendships had inspired real action inside our community. Suddenly, the connection between storytelling and everyday life felt beautifully obvious. That evening, exhausted but grateful, I sat on my front porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold. My phone buzzed again. It was another message from the family we had helped. But this wasn't a simple thank you note. Attached to the message was a photograph taken years earlier. The moment I recognized the people standing in that picture, I gasped. Somehow, their story had already crossed paths with my family's life long before any of us had ever met. The photograph that connected us. I couldn't stop staring at the old photograph on my phone. At first, it looked like an ordinary family picture taken at a neighborhood charity picnic years ago. Children were laughing, parents were smiling, and volunteers stood shoulder to shoulder under bright summer sunshine. Then my eyes moved to the left side of the picture, and my heart skipped a beat. There I was, standing in the background with my husband and our children. We had been part of their story long before either family knew the other's name. Suddenly, everything that had happened over the past few weeks felt connected in a way I never could have imagined. I enlarged the picture several times, almost unable to believe it. Our families had attended the same community event. Our children had probably played together. We had walked past one another without ever saying hello. Life had quietly crossed our paths years before finally introducing us at exactly the right moment. The next morning, I showed the photograph to Sarah and Michael. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Michael smiled and laughed softly. "Maybe that's the funny thing about life," he said. "Sometimes people become important long before you realize they're part of your story." His words stayed with me all day. The more I thought about them, the more I understood why storytelling is such a powerful part of American culture. Whether through books, films, podcasts, or reality TV, stories help people recognize invisible connections. We begin by watching strangers, but we often end by understanding ourselves. That afternoon, the family we had helped invited everyone who volunteered to a small backyard barbecue. It wasn't a grand celebration. There were simple hamburgers, homemade lemonade, folding chairs, children chasing bubbles across the lawn, and neighbors laughing together under warm summer skies. Looking around, I realized something extraordinary. Almost everyone there had first met because of someone else's story. Some had become friends through school events. Others had connected after community projects. Sarah and I had grown closer because of one honest conversation inspired by a television program. Every friendship had started with someone willing to share a piece of real life. While talking with the children, one little boy proudly practiced a new English sentence he had learned at school. "We help each other." Everyone smiled and applauded. Those 4 words captured the entire afternoon better than any long speech could. As an English learner, moments like that remind me that the most useful language is often the simplest. Short expressions spoken with sincerity stay in our memories because they are connected to emotions, not just vocabulary lists. Psychologists often explain that shared positive experiences strengthen social bonds and increase feelings of trust within communities. Watching neighbors laugh together after facing difficult circumstances made that research feel wonderfully real. We were no longer connected by a house fire. We were connected by kindness. As the sun began to set, someone suggested taking one large group photograph to remember the day. Everyone gathered together. Children sat in the front. Parents stood behind them. Just before the camera flashed, Sarah quietly leaned toward me. "Next Friday," she whispered, "let's skip television." I looked at her, surprised. She smiled. "I think we found even better stories." I laughed and completely agreed. But just as the photographer counted, 3, 2, 1, my phone vibrated again with an unexpected message. It wasn't from Sarah. It wasn't from our neighbors. It was from a television producer who had somehow heard about our community's story. The message contained only one question. Would your families be willing to share this story with America? I looked at the screen in complete disbelief, realizing that the journey I thought was ending might actually be about to begin. Every story finds its heart. Would you say yes if someone offered to put your family's ordinary life on national television? That single message stayed on my phone for several minutes while everyone around me continued smiling for the group photo. A few weeks earlier, I would have answered immediately. Absolutely not. I believed cameras only captured drama, embarrassment, and unrealistic moments. But after everything my family had experienced, I wasn't so sure anymore. Maybe the most powerful stories are not about becoming famous. Maybe they are about reminding complete strangers that hope still exists in ordinary American neighborhoods. I showed the message to my husband before anyone else. He read it twice. Then he smiled. I think they're asking for the wrong reason. What do you mean? I asked. They're not looking for perfect people, he replied. They're looking for a real story. That sentence made me pause. For weeks, I had been asking why Americans love reality TV. Standing there under the warm evening sky, I finally understood my own answer. People don't return every week because they expect perfection. They return because they recognize courage, mistakes, forgiveness, laughter, and second chances. Those emotions belong to everyone. Later that evening, our families gathered one last time on the front porch. The children chased fireflies across the yard while the adults shared homemade pie and quiet conversation. Nobody was pretending anymore. Sarah no longer felt pressured to appear perfect. Michael had learned that asking for support was not a sign of weakness. My husband and I had rediscovered simple conversations that had almost disappeared beneath busy schedules. Our children had shown us that the happiest family moments often begin when adults slow down and truly listen. I thought back to the very first Friday night when I reluctantly sat down to watch a reality TV show. I had expected empty entertainment. Instead, I found meaningful conversations, unexpected friendships, a stronger marriage, a kinder neighborhood, and memories that no television script could ever fully recreate. One English phrase has stayed with me through this entire journey: every story matters. The sentence is beautifully simple, yet it carries a message worth remembering. Whether you are learning English one sentence at a time or building stronger relationships one conversation at a time, progress begins when you believe your own story has value. Real communication is not about speaking perfectly. It is about speaking honestly. Researchers who study narrative psychology suggest that sharing personal stories helps people create meaning from difficult experiences, strengthen resilience, and build deeper connections with others. Looking back, I realized that every conversation, every Friday night, every unexpected challenge, and every act of kindness had become part of one larger story. Not because life had become perfect, but because we had chosen to face it together. A few days later, I replied to the television producer. I thanked them sincerely. Then I politely declined. Our family decided that the greatest reward was never appearing on television. It was discovering that we had already become the kind of story we wanted to watch. Sometimes the happiest ending isn't broadcast to millions of viewers. Sometimes it lives around your own dinner table, during an honest conversation, with people who know your flaws and choose to love you anyway. If this story encouraged you to slow down, enjoy simple English, and believe a little more in the quiet power of everyday life, then perhaps our story has already reached exactly where it was meant to go.